In this lecture, we're gonna review a country balance of payment, which record all the transactions that take place between one country and all the other country. We're also gonna investigate how official reserves are used to ensure that the balance of payment does actually balance. We will look at how exchange rates are determined and the different type of exchange rate system that exists. Lastly, we will explore the U.S. trade deficit and determine the impact on the U.S. economy. So the content to cover: international financial transactions, the balance of payments, a flexible exchange rate, fixed exchange rate. We're also going to talk about the current exchange rate system and the historical behind how the global economy has used a different type of exchange rate. And we'll conclude with the recent U.S. trade deficit. So international transaction, one individual or country who participate in transactions use the same currency. The transaction exchange is a simple model of both country that exchange the good because the currency is the same currency. So there's no intermediate transaction required before the trade. But when the party involved are from a different country that use a different currency, you have to proceed through that intermediate asset transaction first, right? So that the buyer will be able to have the correct currency to pay the seller. The process of exchanging currencies create its own market, right? In which a rate of exchange can be determined at the equilibrium rate to clear the market. So the demand of that currency and the supply of the currency will intersect at the level where we will have equilibrium exchange rate. So the balance of payment. The balance of payment is a sum of all international transactions taking place between a nation resident and the resident of a foreign nation. These transactions are primarily fall into either international trade or international asset exchange category. In the United States, the Commerce Department Bureau of Economic Analysis compile a balance of payment statement each year. It is organized into two main categories. First being the current account, right? And we had the capital and financial account. The current account summarizes U.S. trade in currently produced goods and services. Export are plus, because that add to our GDP, and import are minus. For example, in 2015, the balance of good was negative, 760 billion, right? Which represent a trade deficit. But when you look at services, there was a surplus of export over import, leaving a positive balance of 219 billion. Also included in the current account is the net investment income, which represent the difference between interest and dividend payment that foreign pay U.S. citizen and company for service provided, and the interest and dividend U.S. citizen and company pay for the services provided by a foreign capital invested in United States. In 2015, the U.S. net investment income was a positive of 191 billion. The final component of the current account is the net transfer. And that includes both the public and the private. And the net transfer include a foreign aid, a retirement fund paid to U.S. citizens living abroad, and the money that immigrant sent back to their native country. So in 2015, that was a negative balance of 136 billion. So we will look at the statement in the next slide. So the second component of the balance of payment summarizes the international asset transaction. So the capital and a financial account, capital and financial account consist of the capital account, which mainly measure the debt forgiveness, and the financial account, which deal with international purchases and sales of real or financial asset. So the capital account had a balance of $0 in 2015, which indicate that the United States forgave the same amount of loan that other country forgave United States loan. In the financial account, the balance was a positive 486 billion in 2015, which is not necessarily a good thing, because it indicates that the United States sold more of a real and a financial asset to foreign investor than the foreign investor or foreign country sold to United States. So here is the U.S. balance of payment statement of 2018 in billion. So you can see that the balance of the current account and the current account balance and the balance of the capital and financial account, right? All of them must balance to zero. Right? Like any balance sheet, they all balance to zero. This global perspective illustrates the U.S. trade balance. U.S. trade balances with a selected nation in 2017. So you can see that we have a large trade deficit with several nations. Now let's review the existing exchange rate, and explore the different type of exchange rate and give you a little historical how the exchange rate progressed throughout time. So in a flexible or floating exchange rate system, demand and supply are used to determine exchange rate. And this is without government intervention. But in a fixed exchange rate system, government set the exchange rate and use its currency and macro economic policy to adjust its monetary and fiscal policy to maintain the rate that the government set up. So in this graph, you see that the demand for pound, the demand for pound curve is downward sloping, meaning that as the pound become less expensive in terms of dollars, more British goods and services will be purchased since they will be cheaper. And the supply of pound curve, right? The red is curve is up sloping because the British will purchase more US goods when the dollar price of pound rises. So when that happens, the British will buy more US goods and services because they will become less expensive. The determinant of flexible exchange rate there are many factors that can cause a nation's currency to appreciate or depreciate. The basic law of supply demand apply. If the demand for a nation currency increases, that nation currency will appreciate, and vice versa. If the demand drop, if the supply of a currency increases, it will depreciate it. And if one country currency appreciated, some other country currency will depreciate relatively to it. So what causes supply or demand to shift? Any change in consumer preference of this will do that. Change in income will impact it as well. So the change in income relative to the income of other nations will also shift the demand. As will the inflation rate change also. Inflation also is one factor. Okay. Under the purchasing power parity theory, exchange rate should eventually adjust in the way that they equate the purchasing power of various currency. In this end, many people use the Big Mac example, since McDonald's is located in almost every country you can look at how much a Big Mac costs in each nation and then convert that to an exchange rate. One thing to point out is inflation can skew the number if one nation rate is different than that of other nation. Interest rate and expected rate of return on asset can also affect the demand if the relative rate are different between a nation. Another factor also is the speculation. And the speculator are people who buy and sell currency solely to make money. The concept of buy low, sell high. And this speculator can cause a shift in the supply and the demand. So this table summarizes the various determinants of exchange rate. So the disadvantages of a flexible exchange rate. So flexible exchange rate are not without inconvenience or without challenges, right? They can be unpredictable, they can be volatile, right? And because of that, they may discourage international trade. And this instability in a flexible exchange rate can destabilize a domestic economy. Especially when you have a wide fluctuation of the rate. That can depress industry involved in exporting goods. So now let's view the fixed exchange rate. Some nations use a fixed or peg, or a fixed or peg exchange rate to try to avoid the challenges that pose the flexible exchange rate. To avoid the challenge caused by a flexible exchange rate, some nations adopt a fixed or pledge rate, China, for instance. So if the rate is fixed, a shift in the demand or supply of the currency will create a disequilibrium, right? Disequilibrium on the market. So the shift will threaten the system. And then the government must intervene to reestablish the equilibrium at the fixed rate. Government can use official reserve or engage in currency interventions of buying and selling the currency in order to maintain the fixed rate. Government can also try trade policy to discourage import and encourage export. This type of policy can reduce the volume of the world trade and can also lead to retaliation by other nations in response to the trade restrictions. . Government can also use macroeconomic adjustment domestically to try to eliminate the shortage of the foreign currency. The current exchange rate system, what we call the managed flow. So you can see a little historical on exchange rate. Over the year, most nations have used 3 different exchange rate system, right? They started with a gold standard that was used for the longest period, right? Under which a nation currency was tied to his supply of gold, right? Which create a fixed exchange rate. Then we had the Bretton Woods system, was almost a hybrid system that allow a nation to transition, right? Transition to the current managed flow system. So how well does the managed flow to work? Under the current managed floating exchange system, exchange rate among major currency are free to flow to the equilibrium market level, but nation occasionally use currency intervention to stabilize or alter the market rate. The nations recognize the importance of allowing the rate to adjust on their own, but also the importance of maintaining stability in the market. The proponent of this managed flow argue that the system has worked for many years and has helped the global economy go through several severe economic turbulence. But the critics argue that we need more stable exchange rate, right, and need more government intervention to manage the flow. And the current system that seems to be the best compromise between the extreme of the true fixed exchange rate system and the fully free-floating system. In recent years, you can see that the United States has experienced a large trade deficit, right, reaching a record high deficit of $801 billion in 2006. And that amount is equal to 6% of US GDP. There are several causes for the deficit. So during 2002, 2007, the US economy grew at a faster pace than many of its trading nations. This growth enabled Americans to increase the demand for import. The United States also has an enormous deficit with China as it imports more and more goods and services from China. At the same time, China's standard of living is still low, relatively speaking, which means that they do not yet have a large demand for imported goods. One thing to point out also is China has a fixed exchange rate, right? We prevent their currency, they want from appreciated, right? From appreciate relative to other currency. Another factor to point out here is the dependency on the imported, U.S. dependency on the imported oil, as it created a deficit with the OPEC nation. The last piece is the U.S. low saving rate, right? So you remember that from the balance of payment, that a key component is the financial account, which reflect the saving of a nation. Most of our investment has been financed by a foreign investor, since there's not enough domestic saving to meet the demand for investment. And the implication of the continued trade deficit serious. Reflect the fact that we continue to consume far more of the world resources than we produce, and that keep increasing our deficit. So the next, this graph illustrates the annual U.S. trade deficit for a period of 2005 to 2018. We know that the deficit peaked in 2006. I peaked somewhere in 2006. And since then has declined. Meant to the recession of 2007, 2009. Because during the recession, both the demand for both domestic and imported goods and services decline. Given that international trade is hampered by deadweight laws of currency conversion fee, there's a lot of discussion on the possibility to adopt a current currency. But it would make more sense to adopt a current currency, so all the trading partner or the economy use the same currency. Example, as of Eurozone using euro, right? When the member of Eurozone eliminate their respective currency in favor of a single currency, euro, they benefit from increased cross-border trade and a surge in investment. But the payoff is that they had to give up the control of their own monetary policy and lost the ability to use currency exchange to make external adjustment to the current account balance. Up to today, the long-run implication of a single currency in Europe, the euro, are still unknown, as the economy of those countries in some way is still adjusting to the change of adopting a single currency.